Good evening, friends. This is Shubha Lakshmi from I Need to Watch Foundation. Today we are concluding our Wildlife Week celebrations. So while we wait for more people to join, let me know from where you are joining us. Let us know from where you are joining. So today's topic is bird architecture. There is no as such theme for there's no theme that we were following for the Wildlife Week. We just picked up some topics, some interesting topics that might interest people like you, and we thought of concluding it with bird architecture. So, as people join, we will continue interacting with you. So, whoever has joined, just let me know from where you are joining. That would be good. That's the way we start our interactions from there. And if you have any questions during the course of my presentation, please feel free to write it down in the message. I will try and respond to them during the session, or maybe later on I'll do that, though I'll be able to see your questions also while I'm doing it. Yeah, so thank you, friends, for joining, whoever has joined right now. So today we are covering these many topics. One is some facts about bird architecture, then the kind of process birds follow in nest building, and then what types of nests usually are there. Those are the some types we'll be dealing with. A special emphasis on sparrows because sparrow is a city bird, and there is a good amount of work that has happened on sparrows. And also we'll conclude it with how to attract birds to your garden. That is will be the gardening for birds and the etiquettes of bird photography, especially nest photography. And if you have anything interesting to share with the relevant topics which I'm going to talk about, please feel free to write about it. It will be good learning for the other viewers who are here. So let us be a two-way learning process over here. So I remember that when I used to uh, ask children that where do birds live, or rather it is also mentioned in our school textbooks that the bird lives in nest. We all have learned that those lessons, and that's the reason we start with this first sentence. We say that bird don't live in the nest. So nest is not meant for staying purpose. So nest is only meant for raising chicks, raising babies, raising a family. So nest is only is created for laying eggs. Otherwise, birds don't live in the nest. They live among the branches or whichever habitat they are. And birds only make nests during the breeding season. So it's not a year-long activity. For some species, it is a year-long activity who breed multiple times during the year. And some the nest building can be a job where both the pair are involved. The male female have equal roles in making the nest. In some case, it is solo job. Maybe it's only male who is making it, or maybe it's female who is making it. So we'll figure out that which bird are solos and which birds actually work together. And by and large, egg incubation is something mainly job of female, but in some cases, even males do that. And some species of bird, males of bird, uh, the, the males in some bird species also do the the foundation building or even the planning part of it. So it's just a mutual work when it comes to nest. And some birds like beaver birds, they make several nests in one go. It's not that they'll be working on one nest also. And in some species, they actually make dummy nest, which is meant for predators, so that the predator is confused that in which nest the eggs are. That kind of puzzle is there. And city birds have have adapted with very much our trash what we generate. So yeah, they have been using the trash. I think the classic case is of crows. You would have seen crows making nest of all sorts of materials, starting from um, electricity wires, copper wires, anything you name it. The trash they have taken and they have made a nest out of it. And some birds actually line their nest with specific plants, which can actually, evade the mites. Parasites will not enter it. So that those kind of things are also. So there is so much of planning that goes in nest building. So though nest appears to be something very simple thing for us, but the birds do a good amount of planning. Let's find out what is that. So the planning starts right from, so it all begins with the breeding season in the birds. So once the breeding is done, that's where the nest building job comes in. So the very first thing they do is that they have to select a site, and the site is dependent on several factors. Whether like whether what kind of birds, other birds, who are the neighbors. Just like the way we go and find out when we look for new places. So we try to see who are our the neighbors. Then what kind of you know attributes are there for that place. Like, is it like well camouflaged place? It is well protected, or is it very open? And many species are territorial, as you would be knowing. And uh, sometimes the territories are used for the benefit of the bird, but they believe in building a nest along with other birds' nests. So sometimes it is just solo. So they have this all these things actually required for, so birds actually do the scouting for their site selections. And people who are into bird watching, they would have witnessed this site selection, the scouting done by a bird, that how the bird actually inspects an area before making a nest. And once the site is identified, it's very much equivalent to the way we would plan to make our own house. We identify a plot, we buy that plot, and later on we start building the home. And when we plan to build it, so we start looking what kind of materials we are going to use it. So same applies with the birds. And depending on a species, the materials changes. We'll be talking about it as we move further. So let's look at what kind of how many types of bird nest there could be. There are many types, but I have just taken some eight prominent types. Under that each type, there are several bird species that is they come under that each category. So we'll try to go through this each category as we move on. So first category is this the ground nest, and then we look into nest made out of mud, a nest made in the cavities, maybe a tree cavity, maybe a earthen bank cavity, a cup-shaped nest, fork nest, hanging nest, nests that are stuck to wall or some objects. So different kinds of nests. This is the first nest which I would like to share with you. It is not an Indian bird; it's an African bird, and it makes huge nest on a tree fork, where it uses a good amount of twigs to make the nest. And here it says that it takes about 8 weeks and 10,000 twigs to build a nest like this. And not only it builds that, then it does a lining. It's like cementing, with the mud. So the mud is collected and it is used as an insulation, and also it is waterproofing. So probably I'm assuming the way it is for ants who are also using soil, or termites who use it, the saliva acts like a waterproof. So same would be happening over here, and it is a it's a joint effort. Both the male and females make the nest, and but they are not happy with one nest. They keep on building more homes. So they have second homes, third home, fourth homes, some stuff like that. So they keep on making nest whole year. So that is hammercock. That's a bird name. Hummingbird, again, not an Indian bird, but it makes beautiful nest, and they are like tiny cups, and beautifully decorated cups. And the bird, as you know, that hummingbird is a very tiny bird. It's, if you look at your thumb size, that is the size of the bird. of hummingbird, and it's not found in our country. And it makes this such kind of nest, which you can say it is almost stuck to a branch, and it decorates it with lichen and make it camouflage, and it is lined with hairs and feathers inside. Nice cozy nest that the bird makes. And they are basically very skilled laborers, skill builders, I would say. And it is all that, it's a female's job. It's the female who does the entire construction and taking care of it, and male's job is just to mate with the female while she takes care of the rest of the family. A sociable weaver is also an African bird, and they believe they make huge colonies. So it is like a housing society of one species only. So they all live together, and you can look at that. This is a the photograph is taken from the down, so the openings are facing downward, which means that the structure, so the pathway is inside and turning, so it is looping inside, so nobody can get a direct access to the nest. If something enters, it can't go straight into the nest because there will be various twists and turns inside. And they are called social weaver because they all stay together and have a so staying together helps them to ward off predators. So even the birds may be small, so even if there is a predator like a snake or some other animal trying to steal the eggs or chicks, all the birds can flock, and they can create a ruckus to scare away even a big predator. So their strength and unity is what they follow, and their entire nest is made out of grass. This is our Indian bird, very popular garden bird, and I'm sure if you have even a small green patch around your home, tailor bird is the first bird which comes and start making her nest around it. And this bird is very much like it's very comfortable with human beings. So even if you are there in the garden, so the bird will be it usually tries to build nest very close to human, because somewhere they also feel that by humans, so the other predators may not come there, maybe the cats, maybe the snake, so those kind of predators won't come closer to the human homes. So therefore they usually build homes very close to our gardens, and they will be always, the nest will be always at the ground level. Maybe it's like just a bit, maybe 2 feet high from the ground. That is the level where they uh, build the nest. And they'll always look for larger leaves. So if you want tailor birds to be nesting in your garden, you should have climbers or trees which are having broader leaves and bigger leaves, because the tailor bird will not take really effort of stitching 2 or 4 leaves together to make one nest. It just the job becomes very easy if you provide just one big leaf. Because if you look at this, look at my cursor where I'm taking, look at this points over here. So the tailor bird actually stitches, it actually makes holes with it, it helps with the big, and then it takes the grass strands and actually passes it through and makes it is therefore it is called tailor bird, because it literally stitches the nest. So it stitches the nest, and then it starts stuffing with all soft material, maybe some cotton. Even it uses a silk from the spiders to that, because that adds an adhesive, fixing the grass strands together. So they keep doing it. And one of the help one can also give birds is by providing nesting material. If you want birds to breed in your area, you can help them not only with the food, but also providing the nesting material. And if you find a bird flying by with some twig in the mouth, or some feather in the mouth, or some material in the mouth, so be sure that the bird is actually making nest somewhere. But the architect, the best architect among the birds, among the Indian birds, is the Bayaviva bird, because of the extensive and very, I would say, extensive nest what they build, and very painstakingly they build. So it is a male's job to make the nest, because that is like a dowry the male offers to the female. If the house is good, she will mate with him and then go and lay eggs in the nest that he has built. He really works very hard to make this nest, and you can see that initially how the nest looks like, and the final product is how. So the female assess the male's capability by the strength of the nest and by the finishing of the nest. Because if it is a matured male, the nest finishing will be superb, and if it is an immature male, it will be shabby. So what does it say? It basically speaks about the strength of the male, and then the female wants that her baby should inherit a healthy gene, and that's the reason this is a way of showing the capabilities what the male is having. But why is it that it is a very painstaking job? You can imagine if we were to make a nest like this, and with the resources that this bird is having. So the tool what this bird has is the upper beak, okay, the upper beak of the bird and the feet. With this, the bird is actually making the nest, and they have to go and pluck grass strands. So you will always find that the weaver bird nest is made near to water body, always near to water body. The reason is that they will always take a grass strand, dip it in the water, because with the by dipping it, the grass strands become, mendable. It's very easy to mend it, and then make the nest. Sometimes they use the fresh grass, and sometimes they use the dry grass. So they always try to do this dipping behavior. So this is another behavior you can see in beaver birds, that they go and dip the grass and then bring it. So imagine doing that for every grass strand that goes in making a nest like this. That's a pain actually to make a nest like this. But this bird has to do it because that's how he's going to show off to his girlfriend that, hey, look, I'm really good. I can make a really good nest. So yeah. So and what happens that if the female disapproves the nest, so the entire nest is actually hanging on a knot. There is a knot which on which the nest is hanging. The female exactly knows, she actually unties that knot, and that entire nest falls off. And the male has to again, redo it till the female is happy. But once one female is happy, the male switches to other one, and he makes another nest and gets another. So the male has a multiple partner in this case, and that's what it has multiple, so it keeps on making multiple nests, and every nest is having, one of the females who is actually taking care. Then she takes care of the babies, and laying eggs and bringing raising the chicks. So that's a male weaver bird. The red-winged bulbul, again, a garden bird, and they always make nest in the tree forks. So if there is a fork, and in that, and they basically trees at the tree level they do, and trees means at around, say, 7 to 8 feet high. That is the height they usually prefer. I was very surprised once I saw a red-vented bulbul's nest right next to a main road. Next to the road, there's trees which have been planted, and in that the bird was actually nesting. Again, it's the same concept applies here. The birds feel more comfortable if humans are there, because at least the predators, the carnivore predators, won't come closer. So they know that, like, to safeguard, I can be closer to you. So that was, sometimes they have to take this calculated risk. And bulbuls use basically grass strands and twigs to make their cup shaped nest, and their eggs are actually very beautiful. They're blue in color. I still remember seeing once the eggs, they're beautifully tiny blue color. And someone's are messy, someone's home is messy, some like to keep their house neat and clean, and some people, they feel that, no, I like the mess, and let the mess be there. So this is a sunbird. The sunbird is the purpose of having the messy nest is also that the sunbird doesn't want anybody to look at his nest. So it should not attract any attention, so no decorations, no finishing, no exorbitant shapes and sizes, nothing of that sort. Protection or safety is the prime concern of the sunbird. So here the sunbirds make, the hanging nest, and the hanging nest is taking all sorts of trash which one can find in the forest. Now sunbirds also are known to breed in gardens, but not so no, not so easily, but they also known to breed in gardens. In fact, I remember um, uh, one lady had a sunbird nest on the cloth line on third floor. So in the balcony, the sunbird was actually nesting. So third floor balcony probably was very secular for this bird, and the bird chose the cloth line to hang its nest. So it usually hangs, and it uses a good amount of cobwebs, because that, and cobwebs is a is a natural fevicol available in nature. So they just take that and they just weave around. And the whole idea is to camouflage the nest as much possible. And you can't really make out even where the entrance is. So the nest building is completely done by the female, and she also does the incubation alone. But the male helps when the chicks hatch. So raising the chicks, that's where the male. So I call them the waste recyclers because they take everything that is there and make the nest out of it. There's a very interesting association of a bird and an ant. So this is the rufous woodpecker. This is a completely forest bird. You will not see them in gardens. In real forest, they'll seen, and forest where you get to see the pagoda ant nest. This is a carton like structure of a pagoda ant nest, which is made out of wood pulp. The wood has been scraped, like the bark has been scraped by the ants, chewed, and then pasted to make a structure like this. So it is actually a cardboard, fluffy cardboard, you can say. But the rufous woodpecker doesn't make its own nest, but it goes and stays inside this nest. It is like a unpaid tenant and or uninvited guest, you can say. What really happens? It is still mm, not really proved, but the theory says that because the ants communicate with each other using a chemical, there's a pheromone within themselves that they actually the ants, you would have also seen that whenever ants meet, they actually touch their antenna to pass on the chemical code. So this bird is able to mimic the chemical code of the ant. So what happens? Why the bird is making uh, a nest in a ant nest? One, the bird also knows that the ant nest is the most protected nest in the forest. Nobody will dare to peck on an ant nest. That's the understanding what the woodpecker is having. Second, it also sometimes feeds the ant grubs, the ant babies, as a food to its own babies. But how the ants benefit from it? Ants don't have any direct benefit from this bird, but many times when the chicks are growing big, then the woodpecker starts bringing food inside the nest, and sometimes the leftover foods are used by the ants also. So this is a sort of symbiotic relationship where most of the benefit is given to the woodpecker, and not every nest, pagoda nest, you'll find a hole inside it. I saw only one. I've seen so many pagoda nests in my lifetime, but I saw only one nest which was having a hole in it because you need to have rufous woodpecker also in that forest. This is a very common. You can see this in the Sanjay Gandhi National Park in Mumbai. Then the whiteback vultures, so they like skyscrapers, like so they are not like they don't nest down below. They need to have tall buildings or rock crevices or tree tops. So they collect this huge pile of twigs and just they are lined with leaves and that's it. Nothing extraordinary nest they are having, but they are really huge. There's just a shallow, there's a depression in the center in which the eggs are laid and the chicks are raised over there in that. And the parents are actually both parents are involved in this process of nest building. And as you all know that white-back vulture is an endangered species because of the depleting population. The populations have come down more than 90% in the wild, and BNHS and many other organizations are working in reviving this population. So the breeding success is what will see, if this bird starts breeding in the wild more. So that's why the success of this population will be. But currently, the population is very very low. Golden woodpecker. This is so all woodpeckers, most of the woodpeckers are they are tree dwellers. They use the trees for making their nest, and I'm calling it as a drill machine because if anybody has witnessed a woodpecker making a nest in the tree hole, you can hear that sound, that drilling sound of how the woodpecker is doing, and it actually resonates in the forest. And if you Google on the skull structure of the woodpecker, There's a special adaptation that that it is able to bang its head so many, like within a minute, so many times it can actually bang, pecking on the wood, and so hard that ideally the skull should be really, really very strong to take that kind of shock whenever it is vibes, because it literally vibrates when it is pecking on the to drill the holes. So that holes, it takes a really long time, as it said, it takes years to excavate one hole, and that's where they start raising the chick, and you will come to know if the nest is active. Many times the nest will always have the droppings of the birds from the entrance, so that is also one way of knowing that whether it's an active nest or not. In terms of parental care, I think this bird tops the number one, because I think it's a very hardworking dad is here, the great pied hornbill. They also use the tree crevices to nest, but here the female is sealed inside that crevices, in that crevice where she is going to lay eggs, and that crevice is filled with soil entrance, a mud entrance, and who does all this, the male bird does all it, and he actually like almost enclose the female inside the nest, and then there's a small opening is there through which the female puts her beak out. So all the time when she's incubating inside the hole, the male keeps on feeding her. So his job is constantly to be alert, to be around that, and he has to keep on feeding the female while she is incubating. And then when the chicks hatch, the job becomes more difficult, because of course when the chicks hatch, the female comes out, and again they seal up the entrance, and then they have to feed the babies. So the babies have to be fed with it. So they are. This is like a very committed couple, I would say, who are very committed in raising the babies, and obviously, you can't really easily see a hornbill nest, because they are the denizens of really healthy forest. So if you go to deeper forest and really good forest, that's where the hornbills, even sighting hornbill becomes difficult, and nesting of hornbill is like uh, is a very rare occasion. At least I have not seen any nesting hornbill so far, but the stories are amazing. You can read up on the behavior of how they actually do this entire the breeding behavior of breeding biology of great pied hornbill is very interesting. You should read up on that. And the barn owls who are bowl keepers. All the you would have seen the trees have this bowls created, and these bowls are basically created when a branch falls off. When a branch falls off, so that's where this cavity has been created, and these cavities are mainly used by the owls. All kind of owls, like the owls and owlets, they all use this cavities. And in the city, we get the barn owls. So yeah, of course, the barn owls don't have enough trees where they actually stay in the cavities. In the city area, they basically stay in any cavity of the buildings, or wherever they have some small crevices, they actually stay there. So that is where they. So there is no nest as such they build. There's just a cavity they just use to raise their babies. Swallows, you would have seen this bird, fast flying bird, very fast flying bird with a fork tail usually, and tiny bird, and they usually fly. You'll see them mostly in the evening time flying, very, because at the time they're actually feasting on the mosquitoes or insects or other insects who are flying at that point of time. Basically an insectivorous bird. See, here it is a hardworking mom. We saw the great pied hornbill, the hardworking dad, and here is a hardworking mom. Why we are saying so? Because the female swallows, they build this mud and saliva cup nest. You can imagine that she has to cement this entire nest to a to a vertical wall. There is no structure, no support, nothing. It is literally a vertical wall on which she has done, and you can see the tiny tiny pellets which she collected from nearby source wherever she's found the mud. Some saliva is added, and those tiny tiny pellets have been plastered to the vertical wall to create a cup kind of a structure. It is a really you know, task, because the female does it all the job, and it requires like, it means 1300 trips to gather enough pallets of the material. And males typically do around a quarter of nest building work. So obviously, it's the major work is done by the female. And but this nest is actually is reusable. It could be reused, and many times I've seen this. These nests, like sometimes they're abandoned, but they can be used by either the same bird or the other bird. And then they do a simple lining, and you can see the outer margin of the outer rim of the nest. It is curved so that the eggs don't roll off, the eggs don't fall. So so there's a boundary, and which can actually protect it. And the always it is closer to the ceiling of any structure, so that there is the protection automatically comes from the top. It is not completely open on the top. Edible swiftlet, this is an endangered species, and it is. I mentioned you that the earlier swallow was using mud to make her nest. This bird is exclusively making nest out of its own saliva. The saliva is secreted, and that's where the saliva gets dried up, and then this thin, you would, if you would have seen the starch when we cook rice or something, and when the water, the rice water, when it comes and when it dries up, you can see that it's flaky thing. So that starchy kind of material, so that is what happens. Of course, this is more stronger material. So it is like a cup like thing, like a hammock. It creates again on the walls, and that's where it lays the egg. And it's usually a cave dwelling bird. It is not done in open, and it is in Maharashtra. In some caves, it is recorded to be found, and they are harvested. They are sold. It's illegally traded for southeastern countries who actually make cuisines out of it. So it's an edible. Therefore, it is called edible swiftlet nest. So this is a bird which usually prefers a water bank or a mud bank, where the mud is there, like a bank, usually cut in the soil. You see, as you go in the forest, you find a mud cut is there. The mud has cut through, and that those are the areas where this bird, the green bee eater, goes and makes the nest. So I call them bankers, because they make nest along the banks, usually around a river or a water body, because the soil is very moist and it is soft, and it could be easily excavated, and the bird can go and drill hole inside it, and it becomes easier for the bird to nest over there. So this is, so if you find holes in the mud banks ever, it could be a couple of birds. And there's a kingfisher also who does the same thing, and the green beater also does the same thing. Many times, if you see something like this, you can always spend some time and try to wait if some bird is flying by, so you get to know who is the owner. This is another endangered bird. This it's a Micronesian megapod, and they are mound builders. Look at this! Look at the size of the nest and the size of the bird. So it's an entire heap of leaves covered with the sand, and that heat which is generated inside this is what incubates the uh, egg. So here the bird is not incubating, but the nest itself is incubating because of the temperature that is generated because of the decomposing leaves. That is a megapod. I think this bird, I think she has the best strategy of protecting her young ones. This is a red wattle lapwing, and if anybody has witnessed this bird out in, she usually in the open areas is where you can see this bird. If you hear the bird, and try to you try to wander in that area for a very long time, the bird will start screaming for a very long time, and like continuous scream calls she'll start giving. If she does that, that means that her nest is somewhere, and therefore she doesn't want you to trample her nest. So practically there is no nest for this bird. There's no nest at all. The bird is completely relying on the camouflage eggs and the camouflage chick. The color combination is such a way that they look like pebbles or they look like rocks. So here I will show you the nest. Here is the nest, the eggs, and just like they're just very much like one stone in the on the ground, and it's completely open ground. And when the chicks hatch, they are also very camouflage color. So what the bird does, how does the bird actually protects its babies, is that if somebody is trying to come closer to her chicks, basically, so she performs this broken wing technique, which is basically to distract the predator. Say, for example, there's a bird of prey which is approaching the chick, and this bird is trying to distract the attention of the predator by showing that it has a broken wing, which means that it is having broken wings, so it can't fly. So the predator thinks that, okay, that makes a very easy thing for me. I can very well go and catch the bird because it's not able to fly. So the predator starts chasing this bird, and this bird actually takes the predator away from her nest. And as the predator comes very close to her, then she actually takes a flight. So by the time the predator has lost the clue that from where he or she had started from. So that is the way the red wattle lapwing protects her babies. And even this father, he's too cute. The pheasant-tailed jasana, a water bird, usually seen on water. It is also called lily tortoise. Why? Because they actually they are the ones who can actually walk on the water. They really they have very adapt the feet are very are so adapted that they can actually walk in the water. So how does this bird help? So here the you I give you an example of the weaver bird where the male was like having multiple partners, and female was doing all the hard work of raising the chicks. यहाँ पे उल्टा है, you know. The pheasant jasana here, the female mates with several, she has several partners, and the job of rearing the bringing up the babies is of the male. So here is what the male is left with: the eggs, four eggs, and also the nest is actually leaves. It is a floating nest used by all float vegetation, whatever vegetation is there, and the eggs are kept among the leaves. And the male guards these eggs till they are hatched. And once they are hatched, so the male will always remain closer. And if the male sees any threat, he makes a call to the birds. If the birds immediately sometimes come closer, and they are hidden under him. Partially they're under the leaf itself. The birds are hidden, and by the call, the male is able to communicate with the chick whether the danger is there. You please be there for a while, and once the danger is gone, the chicks can come out. And sometimes it also carries the birds under the wings. So this is like amazing, the kind of uh, I would say paternal care which has been demonstrated by this bird is really cute, I would say. And we come to our most common birds of the city, the nexus of koel and the crow. How the koel is, as you all know, the brood parasite. And I remember many years ago, someone was telling me that they are hearing more of koel in their locality, and they said this is a really good sign that I'm seeing more and more koels in my locality. I said yes, in a way it is a good, because it's a parasitic on crow population. But on the flip side of it, it is also saying that the crow population is on the rise. Therefore, the quail's population is on the rise. And if the crow's population is on the rise, it means that there's ample waste lying around for the crows to breed. So we are not taking care of our waste. It's a direct reflection on us of what is happening with our environment. Okay, so I think most of you know the story how the koel fools the crow, lays her egg, and how the baby is also, like they smarter than the parents. So here's what it happens. So the brood parasitism in nature is a way of controlling population, and always the rule of a parasite is to have a metabolism faster than the host, which means that even if the koel lays the egg later on, the Hatching is for the hatching of the egg happens of the quail first, not the crows first. Why? Because the metabolism of the quail egg is higher than the crow's egg. So the female crow is distracted by the male quail, and the female when the female crow tries to chase away the male quail, that's when the female crow comes and female quail comes and lays her egg. And when she lays her egg, she tries to remove one egg from the crow's nest, so that the bird can see that it is all her clutches intact. And so by the time the female crow comes back, so she sees that her eggs count is still same. Not that they know how to count eggs, but I'm just saying. And then the female the chick of the quail hatches first, and the chick is also smarter. So chick also knows that, okay, I don't want anybody else in this nest other than me. I want all the attention, I want all the food that is meant for me. So it throws, it actually ejects the eggs from the nest like this. There's a popular documentary also online, you can look for it, how the quail baby does it. And it's amazing that this bird is blind and almost nothing is just hatched, and it is just trying to get rid of its rival first. And when the quail sees that, when the crow comes and it sees that, oh, there are no other eggs, maybe some predator has eaten or whatever, and it starts raising a quail baby. So that's how the story goes on, and this is a way of controlling the crow's population. So quail doesn't make any nest because there's no need to make a nest. We come to the sparrows. We all know that they're not now, but maybe a few years ago, the population was on decline, and thereafter there has been a good awareness about sparrows, and that's when this World Sparrow Day was came into existence, which is celebrated on 20th March every year. It was such a humble bird, and we never noticed it that when it actually vanished from our neighborhood. So sparrows are the indicators of that how our lifestyles have changed. The homes that were there before, the food that was available earlier. So everybody knows that most of the people would think that the sparrow is feeding only on grain. It is a grainivorous bird, but her babies are not grainivorous. Her babies are insectivorous. So it's not just that you install a bird feeder and install a bird home, sparrow home, the bird will feed. If there is no food for her babies, still the bird will not breed in those boxes. So if you have a garden and if you have open ground also, so there is one more requirement what sparrows have is the dusting behavior. They need a dust in which they take a dust bath. So if you have open grounds, not concrete ones, open grounds, that is a ideal space, ideal environment for sparrows, because open ground and gardens means there is insects available, caterpillars available, worms available, which the birds can take, and then she can feed her babies, she can take a dust bath. So everything is there in place then. So just having a bird feeder and bird home is not going to solve the sparrow problem, but her entire requirement should be considered. And there has been a good initiative on documenting how many sparrows were there. BNHS had done this citizen science project, and thereafter, there has been a good awareness, and sparrows population has actually come back. It has come because people have become more and more aware. So, if you want birds to come to your locality wherever you are, one is that take a bird count of your locality. That how many birds you can see besides three popular birds, that is crow, mena, say four, pigeon, sparrows. Say four. Uh, Besides the four birds, do you see a tailor bird? Do you see a bulbul? Do you see a robin? Do you see any other birds are coming? At least 6 to 7 varieties of birds are there. Then it is somewhat balanced environment, I would say. If not, then you can create a balanced environment, and I think one can do it by vegetation, by doing plantation. There are many bird attracting plants that one can plant, like Singapore cherry is the best city plant which one can plant, and it easily grows. It is a small tree, it doesn't grow very big, it doesn't need a big space. The fruits are edible for birds. Birds love to come and feed on it. Of course, I won't recommend you planting a ficus tree, but if there's a ficus tree on the roadside or somewhere, that also attract birds, because there are many birds which feed on fig plants. So there are various, and if you have hibiscus plant, if you have Jamaican spike, all tubular flowers or tiny tiny flowers. So all those flowers actually attract birds to take nectar, and you can additionally install bird homes. You can have a bird feeder. You can also have a nesting material, so that there is a ready-made material available for birds to collect from here, the images which I'm showing. And if you are not having open ground, you can create a mud bath also. You can create a mud bath in an open pan kind of thing, and create a water bath. All these requirements, if you provide, then birds will love to be in your there. And hedges are very important. Creating a hedge line wherever possible, because birds love to nest in the hedge lines, and also they stay in that hedge lines. And I've seen some homes, there is this the plants like bitter hedge called clerodendron. If you have a hedge of clerodendron, or there is one more plant called curtain creeper, people use it along the on their garden boundaries. Or you are having the ice cream creeper, or even bougainvillea. So all these tiny, they create a bush effect in the gardens. Anything that creates a bush effect benefits birds, especially basically smaller birds. They love to stay in that. It gives protection to them. So don't, if you are having a garden, don't keep it too trim and prime. You need to have some messiness over there. That is what the birds love. So if you create that, certainly birds come, and it works actually. It does work. So you can try out these techniques. And I have shown you a good amount of bird nest photographs, right? But it's now actually considered unethical to take a photograph of a bird nesting, because that impacts the bird. One is that we expose the nest, we get predators attention to the nest, so the nest becomes very vulnerable. And people who have tried to take in photographs, it's not that they have done it in a very ethical manner. They would have trimmed all the branches, they would have removed all the camouflage nature of it, and made the nest bare enough to take a photograph. So if you ever see a photograph like that, you should know that the photographer has actually taken away the entire shelter of this bird. Otherwise, the bird nest can't be seen in isolation. So I have all these pictures which I have used today in my presentation. They are taken it from the net. But if you have to ever do a photography, it is best to be avoided, because now there's enough photographs taken by many people. There's enough references available which you can use. You need not really take a bird nest photograph. If you have to take also, you can take a photograph from long distance, but it will be of no use to, because it will not really communicate anything. So the nest photography is considered unethical photography in terms of wildlife photography. And if you see a nest, there is no point in showing everybody that nest. So there's no, you need not go to the nest very often to see, oh, how many eggs the bird has laid, oh, the whether the chicks have hatched. No, don't do that, any of that, because your curiosity might kill the chicks, and the birds will be like, basically crows become very attentive when you start uh, you know looking around, and crows follow you, and they get to know that, okay, there's something here, that this person is again and again going. So that's how the attention goes to the nest. So best is that avoid as much possible uh, taking photography nest, and even observing of it also. There are now very ethical ways of doing it, but they are very expensive. Like, people have installed cameras to see that what happens, and remotely one can see all that. But anyway, I thought I should mention this part. So that's it, friends. That comes to an end to my presentation. We have an app on birds. It's a free mobile app. You can download it. It is basically on city birds. Any 50 city birds in the city, you can identify using these birds. This mobile app, unfortunately, is only available for Android phone. And so it's called iNature Watch Birds. You can look up on Android phone, on Android platform. And also we run online courses. One is a birds for beginners and gardening for wildlife. These two courses which talk about birds and gardening for birds. It's It's a 3 month, earlier it was a 3 month course, now it is only 6 week course. So if you're interested, you can let us know. So whenever we start the next batch, we'll keep you informed. So thank you very much, friend, for joining me today. And if you have any questions, you can just write here in this column while I'll try to respond to it. So somebody is asking Taylor Bird use which material to stitch? Grass strands basically they use. They use the grass strands, and yes, they are strong enough because the nest, the actually the bird weight is very, the bird is very lighter. The babies are also very lighter. So yes, grass strands can support it. And thank you, Ketki, for watching this with me. Ketki is our trustee, and also all our courses which we run on related to birds. She is one of our resource persons. Yeah. So friends, if you have any questions, please write here. I can see your questions and I can respond to it, because once I close this, the session will close too. So thanks a lot for joining me here. Please write a feedback for us, and it will be helpful. And with this, we are actually concluding our Wildlife Week celebrations, which has today is the last day of Wildlife Week. So, so thank you, friends. I hope this presentation was of some use for you. And this is a recorded session, so you can share it with others. If you know any teachers, any students, please do share this with them. It will be useful for them. Yeah. So thank you so much, friends. If you keep writing here, I'll respond to your queries there. So thanks a lot.